Well, if you've been paying attention to what's been going on in both the UK and France, you'll know that there's been some pretty interesting political activity. The question is why should you care? And we're going to discuss that today because I think most of us knew that the Uni-Party was not going to take what was going on both in the EU and the United States lying down. And what we saw happen, not just in the UK, but especially France, was not only the most coordinated effort of every single, we'll say, mainline political party to prevent the rise of another political party, but it actually provides us some insight into things that we could potentially see within the presidential year election here in the United States. Because I'm going to tell all of you right now, a lot of the things that most people are concerned about are probably just distractions from the thing you ought to be concerned about in the United States this year in 2024. We're going to go over all of that and more in this episode of Making the Argument, brought to you by Jeremy's Razors. As always, I am your host, Nick Freitas, and with me in the studio is my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees.
Hello, everyone.
And then we have our political prognosticator and resident historian, Christian Hines.
Hello.
And listen, this is going to be an interesting one. I know we did an episode, about a week or so back, talking about what happened with the EU Parliament elections. And so let's dive in here a little bit on just a quick recap to get everyone up to speed on where we were at before. So if you look at what happened in the EU, it kind of sent shockwaves through a lot of countries. In fact, France, it's not like France was scheduled to have this election. The the President Macron just dissolved parliament and called for snap elections because they were so concerned about what happened in EU Parliament. So what happened? Well, right-wing parties, or as the European and American news media, far-right parties, which generally means parties that would like to have a sovereign border and, not be completely, dependent upon the EU for their own state sovereignty. Those parties ended up getting historic wins in the EU Parliament. And a lot of that has to do with economic issues in Europe. A lot of it has to do with mass migration issues within Europe, crime issues. And gosh, that sounds a little bit familiar to some of the things and some of the issues that are driving the elections here in the United States as well. So European voters showed up en masse and gave huge electoral wins to very conservative political parties in the EU. Some, domestic wins in places like the Netherlands, but you also saw, again, this greater conservative representation within the EU as a whole, within the EU Parliament. The other thing that you saw happening at pretty much the same time that this was taking place is we all saw the debate between President Trump and Joe Biden. Now, President Trump had been slowly increasing his polling percentage within the U.S., but after that debate, there was no more hiding the cognitive decline of Joe Biden, and you actually started to see massive gaps taking place in the polls between Trump and Biden. And again, this wasn't just because of the debate. The debate almost operated as something of a capstone. You started to see more and more people getting fed up with what was going on between kind of the trumped up convictions directed against Donald Trump, on top of all of the problems that we're also seeing within the United States. Again, a lot of it crime, a lot of it economic, and at least a portion of that tied to completely unrestrained migration that's taking place, illegal immigration that's taking place predominantly at the southern border within the United States. So you already had this massive frustration, but you had a lot of voters that weren't quite ready to commit to Donald Trump. And then, interestingly enough, a combination of the conviction itself, which a lot of people interpreted as basically the state going after a political opponent, that actually had a groundswell of support. I would say that in a lot of ways, and Christian, I'd like your opinion on this. In a lot of ways, what it did is it solidified a lot of people that were maybe holding their nose and voting for Trump, now kind of took on this attitude of, screw this, man. It's the deep state against this guy, and if they hate him this much, then I'm behind him. I mean, I think there were some people, in fact, we actually read off some tweets from some people that were concerned about what the state was doing to Donald Trump that caused them to actually switch over. But I think it really rallied his base to say, forget this. This is us against you. I mean, would you agree with that?
No, I would agree. And we've talked at length about it on this show, right? I mean, I remember last summer we talked about the FBI raid in Mar-a-Lago, and then we talked about the indictments, and then we talked about the conviction.
Yeah.
And who knows, we might be talking about prison sentences in the future, depending on how, that conviction and future trials might play out. So I think that definitely did like radicalize a lot of people into realizing that our own government has been weaponized against who they view as their political opposition.
Threats to democracy.
Yeah, it's interesting how, democracy means imprisoning our opposition when they get too popular.
Yeah.
In fact, actually, this happened in Germany recently, where there were courts that ruled in, and we're not going to talk about that at length today,
Yeah.
but in Germany, where the AfD, which is supposedly the far right, danger to democracy party, which by the way, they're not, they just want controlled immigration. They even support free markets. AfD members are now banned from possessing firearms because courts in Germany have declared that they are a far-right threat to democracy.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is, and again, the reason why we're going through all of this before we jump into what just happened to the UK and France and why it's relevant to the United States is because this isn't just a left-wing backlash. And that's what needs to be understood. Right now, what we saw over the last couple of months was a surge of voters coming forward, voting not just for conservatives, but for conservatives they thought were actually dedicated to conservative principles. Because we all know there's a lot of people out there that run as conservatives, and we're going to talk about this with the UK elections, who quite frankly are indistinguishable from most people on the left, right? They basically what they are is they're a center leftist running as a conservative. That's all they are. And people rejected that. Like, it's important to understand that conservatives and libertarian style voters rejected candidates that theoretically 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they would have voted for, right? Or members of a party that they would have voted for because they would have thought that it was an accurate reflection of their views. And what they did now is they found parties that, again, 15, 20 years ago, didn't have any seats, right? They might have run a re-election, they might have run for office in multi-party democracies, but they didn't get any seats, right? They were protest votes. Well, now the parties that were the protest votes are starting to gain actual power. And what we're seeing is that there is a whole block of established political parties that have had a seat at the table for decades now, have been the ones crafting policy and running it to include ones that consider themselves center-right parties. And what we just saw was that when their power gets threatened, these center-right parties, these moderate right parties, they will align with literally anyone. And we're going to go into specifics on what we mean by that in order to keep themselves in power at the expense of these other parties that are starting to rise up because they actually reflect the frustrations that everyday citizens, whether it be in Germany, France, the Netherlands, the UK, and maybe one day here in the United States, are actually showing concerns over. All right. So that's what we're going to go over today. And look, I think this makes sense because one of the things that we can't stand is somebody that advertises one way, right? And then does something completely different. But you know who you don't have to worry about with that? Jeremy's Razors, right? When Jeremy's Razors tells you they're going to give you a quality product, they give you a quality product. And I'm going to talk specifically about they have now, it's the Precision 5 flip back trimmer, lets you perfect those sharp lines. Why is that important? Well, because if you're a guy like me, if you're a guy like Christian that has a beard, a very prominent masculine beard, you need to be able to trim around that thing, right? Just because we don't shave all of the face doesn't mean we don't shave any of the face. And Jeremy has you covered, right? Jeremy's has you covered with all of the accoutrement you need to both keep a clean shaven face, if that's what your lady prefers, or to make sure that that luxurious beard that you have crafted, that you have properly manicured in order to be the very pinnacle of masculinity stays right where it needs to be. That's where you can get things like beard oils, you can get the brushes, you can get everything that you need. Plus, as a guy that doesn't particularly like to shop and really doesn't like to make separate shopping trips for all of the razors and combs and beard oils and shampoo and all that, I like the fact that I can go to Jeremy's Razors, right? I can go to jeremy'srazors.com. I can use promo code Nick, and I can get 15% off my order, and it's just going to come to my door. So if you go to the link in the description and use promo code Nick, you're going to get 15% off your entire order. So what I would recommend is take Jeremy's to the cleaner, man. Go there, buy all that stuff, right? Get it delivered to your door, get 15% off, and be happy because once again, Jeremy's Razors, the only razors made exclusively of roundhouse kicks from Chuck Norris, because that's the only type of razor that can handle this facial hair, right? Only type. jeremy'srazors.com. Go to the link in the description. Use promo code Nick, get 50% off. All right. Let's start off by talking about what happened with the UK elections. Now, I'm going to give a brief summary right up front, right? So, Reform Party, which is kind of like you got the, actually, let me back up a little bit. You got the two major parties. That's the Tories and Labour, right? That's the Tories are the conservatives. Labour is the left-wing party. You've got a ton of other little parties. You got the Greens, right? You got the Liberal Democrats. They're all kind of on the left.
SNP.
Right?
You have some regional parties.
The Scottish National Party, which really got trounced this time around. But those are all left-wing parties. And on the right, what you really had was the Tories. You had the Conservatives. It was the only real conservative party. Now, Reform, which used to be
the Brexit Party before that.
Yeah, the Brexit Party. You had UKIP. You had, but
UKIP was like the generation before Brexit Party. Yeah. It's gone now because Nigel Farage was the kind of the head of UKIP for a long time.
Yeah,
and then after Brexit took place, there was a delay in implementing Brexit, which is why he formed the Brexit Party as a pressure group towards the Conservatives to get them to get the job done.
Yes, because Conservatives had promised, hey, elect us and we'll carry out Brexit, and then they weren't, right? So it's important to understand that the Tories, technically, the Conservative Party in the UK, has been running the country for 14 years. Mm-hmm. The problem is there's no real distinction between the way that if you would have been told 14 years ago, hey, you're going to have a conservative party and after 14 years of a conservative party running the UK, you're going to end up with this. You're going to end up with all the same issues. In fact, even worse than it was before on things like mass migration. You're going to end up with, massive inflationary issues. You're going to end up with massive economic issues, all of that. You're going to end up with all those problems after 14 years of conservative government. Somebody would have said, that's ridiculous. That's there's no way that'll happen. That's what those crazy reform people are telling you or whatnot. Well, it turns out that's exactly what they got. So after 14 years of so-called conservatives governing as center-left, the Reform Party, which had no money, and understand, like in the UK, you get like 5 solid weeks of campaigning.
It's not a lot.
It's not a lot. It's not like the US where you're dealing with this like a year and a half, 2 years. You get like 5 weeks of solid campaigning. Well, Reform had no real organization. It had no money. What it essentially had was in the UK, they have what they call manifestos. So each party puts out their manifesto. Reform refused to call theirs a manifesto. They called it a contract with the people. And they said the reason why we don't like calling it the manifesto is because right now when people hear manifesto, what they hear is lie. That's what Nigel Farage said. He goes, so here's our contract. This is what we'll do. And here's what I'm going to tell you. As a strong free market, conservative, there was stuff in their platform I don't like. There was stuff in their platform that I would have described as being more like center left than I would, traditional conservative or whatnot. But on the whole and on the issues that kind of mattered the most to the people that are the most frustrated, it really resonated. And they did have policies that were addressing issues like mass migration.
It resonated with the traditional conservative voter that felt betrayed by their own party. And rightfully so, because you brought up some economic issues. Obviously, the Tories inherited a disastrous economy in 2010 that was reeling from the 2008 financial crisis. But not only did they not arguably really fix the problem, because the UK's, if you look at the direction of incomes in the UK pre-2008, post-2008, the UK has been lagging behind since the financial crash in 2008. Not only did they kind of like fumble the ball, and then you had COVID, you had inflation, you had the guilt crisis in 2022. Not only did they fumble the ball on economics, they really fumbled the ball in a way that nobody was expecting on some of the social policy stuff. Like, I mean, it was a Tory government that decided we're going to hoist the trans pride, progress flag on every government building and paint it on sidewalks and street corners. It was the Tory government that decided we're going to import 1% of the UK's population every year in mass migration.
To give you an idea, that would be the equivalent of what would it be in the United States? Like 4 million, not quite 4.
It'd be over 3 million a year.
Yeah, it'd be over 3 million a year,
which is actually what we're getting in illegal immigrants.
So keep that in mind. We're getting about 3. We usually do about 1 million a year. We're getting over 3 million a year because of illegal immigration. That is what the Tory party was doing legally, voluntarily. Like, here you go. And again, with the typical lines that you would see coming from the left, this idea like we can just throw out that term diversity is our strength without any qualifications on what that means. And so conservatives were fed up. And in fact, when you look at the exit polls, Labor is bragging about their historic victory, and it was historic in some ways that I'm sure they're very happy about it. In some ways, they are not very happy.
Yeah, they got 411 seats. I've got the Wikipedia article of the results, not because I like Wikipedia so much, but I just wanted to in a broad sense show the overall results here, right?
Yeah.
And so when you look at the just raw numbers, right, it's like, oh, well, Labor won.
Labor just crushed it.
I mean, this is like Tony Blair 1997 sized majority.
Yeah.
Tony Blair was the last leader of Labor to win a parliamentary election because Gordon Brown came after him, but then he lost in 2010. And then obviously Jeremy Corbyn didn't win.
Yeah,
right.
He was pretty much a communist.
So they put in Keir Starmer, who's kind of like Corbyn light. He's Corbyn without the rhetoric, so to speak. Kind of a milquetoast moderate is how he tries to present himself, although he definitely has left-wing positions.
I will say though, there was a very funny interview that they did where he was on there and they said, "So can a woman have a penis?" Right? And he's like, "Well, I don't think this is an effective way to talk about this conversation." It's like that's the stupidity that we're at right now. But honestly, if you had brought on Sunak, he probably would have said something similar, right? He probably would. Well, this isn't the appropriate time to talk about.
Well, I mean, at the start of the campaign, he was talking about the dangers of the far right, the leader of the Conservative Party. And I mean, when you look at the results, right, the Tories lost 2/3 of their members.
Yeah, they got crushed.
They got utterly crushed. I mean, what's interesting is the Liberal Democrats surged. Obviously, Labor surged, right? They picked up over 200 seats. But look at the numbers, though. This is what's telling, the percentage. Labor won. One of in terms of size versus the second largest party right now, Labor has the largest majority of any government in history, period, the end. And in terms of raw seat count, they were only like 4 or 5. I think they're actually like 7 off of 1997 Blair, where I think he got 418 and they have 411. But in terms of size of majority, though, it's larger than even Tony Blair was. But in terms of popular vote and where they won the votes, it's in some ways a paper-thin majority. You just swing the results just a few points in the other direction, and Labor could lose 200 seats in the next election if there's a backlash against them, which I think there actually will be if the right can get their act together. The right is utterly splintered right now because the Tories needed to be punished by their own members for betraying them. Well, but that doesn't mean that Labor's popular.
No, in fact, the most common, if you look at the exit point out of the UK, the most common phrase with respect to why are you voting for Labor, it was to get rid of the Tories. So it's not, Nigel Farage actually said this too, it's not as if people are like, oh, I'm so excited about the Labor manifesto. I'm so excited about the Labor policies that they're going to, that was not it. They were so furious with the Tories that they just wanted to get rid of them. And it's also one of the reasons the Tories want to go around and blame the Reform Party as splitting their vote. What they don't understand is that a lot of the people that showed up to vote for reform, they were going to vote for reform or no one. There was no, well, I got to go with the lesser of two evils. Like they've been doing that for 14 years. And here's what they found about the lesser of two evils. It's still evil, right? That's what they found out. And sometimes this is what is required. The population actually has to engage in a significant enough backlash against one of their mainstream parties in order to get them to do what they want them to do, to actually be honest about what they believe and fight for it. And you actually saw that because some of the most conservative members of the Tories won their seats.
Yeah.
Now, here's what we want to explain, because Christian's point here is very important to understand that on paper, on just the number of seats in Parliament, Labor's victory looks overwhelming because it was. It was overwhelming. Here's what it actually means, though. This current Labor government, this current Labor prime minister, won actually a smaller percentage of the popular vote than any prime minister in the last half century. Right about that. Right about half century. Okay, people are asking, how is that possible? How is it possible that they could have the lowest percentage of the popular vote and yet have such a dominating control of the British Parliament? And there's kind of a few reasons for this, right? One of it has to do with the fact that it's a multi-party democracy, right? Which everybody's like, oh, if only we had multiple parties, this would be so much better. We're going to talk about that. Multi-party democracy, something called constituencies, right? And the other is first past the post, right? These are the
there
three
was a lot
reasons.
about their elections that my brain just could not.
It's
I couldn't figure. I mean, it's funny because we talk in our country about how confusing some of our election processes can be, and trying to explain, the Electoral College and all of this stuff. Like it can get really confusing. Well, I thought, we're pretty confusing until I was looking at the UK's voting structures and how all of that works. I'm like, what is first past the goalpost?
Yeah, we actually have the same thing in the United States, and all it means is that if you have multiple people running, you can win off of plurality. You don't need a majority.
Oh.
So that's essentially what it means. And then when you talk about constituencies, what you should think about in the U.S. is districts.
Okay.
Right. So. And look, there's a lot of people that are frustrated with first past the post right now because it obviously didn't work out in the favor of what they wanted. But the other source of the frustration with it is the same people that are constantly screaming about democracy and proportional representation. Those are the people that benefited the most from a lack of proportional representation if you want to add up the entire national vote totals. Because when you read it, Reform had a great night. They went from being a nothing party to the third largest vote getter in the entire country, and yet they only got 5 seats in Parliament. How is it possible? How is it possible that the liberal Democrats, who got significantly fewer votes than Reform, now have 72 seats in Parliament, but Reform's only got 5?
And Reform got over 500,000, over 600,000 more votes.
So is there any
the Liberal
indication
Democrats.
as to where would this have landed if you had something like a ranked choice or something like a...
If you would have had ranked choice, I don't know, but I don't want to go into that yet.
Sorry.
Let's talk about first past the post, all right? So now all of those conditions, right? Constituencies, again, and if you're thinking US, think districts, don't think constituencies. And if you're thinking first past the post, just think you need to get the most votes out of everybody running for the office. The only reason stuff like this doesn't happen in the United States to the degree that we just saw it here is because we don't have powerful third, fourth, fifth, sixth political parties.
They're irrelevant spoilers. Whereas in the UK, they can actually win a seat.
So Republicans, if you want to win a seat in the United States in almost every single election of consequence, you're either going to be a Republican or a Democrat, right? So what ended up happening was Reform ended up second place in over 100 constituencies. There's 650 constituencies total in the UK, right? They ended up second in 100 of those constituencies. But guess what that means? Nothing. Nothing with respect to your representation of Parliament. You have to win the constituency, just like in the United States, you have to win the district. Now, conservatives have typically looked at this and said, well, yes, that's the way this system works. We don't add up the popular vote of the entire country and then apportion representation based off of that, because then you would have places like New York City that vote 80% Democrat and saying, I can't believe it. We only get one representative in our district. 80% of us vote. Because that's not how it works. You're voting for a representative from your district. Okay, so that's the part where I will push back a little bit on some of the online commentary on this saying, oh my gosh, this is so unfair. Well, again, if you want representation based off of a geographical district, well then, yeah, obviously, if you win a lot more seats, even by smaller percentages, you're going to have higher representation within Parliament. But the reason why I don't think this translates in the United States the way it translates in the UK is because the UK doesn't really have states in the way that the United States has states.
They do have Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland.
They do as part of the United Kingdom, which have their own
devolved parliaments.
The devolution, they have their own parliaments in those various areas. But it's nothing like, if you live in England, right, the British Parliament is really the ones you're looking to. They really don't have the equivalent of state legislatures like we do in Virginia and Texas. They don't.
No,
there's no real
They have
equivalent.
local governments. They have councils and
sure.
City governments and stuff like that. But they don't, we are a federal republic of republics, whereas the UK does have 4 constituent countries that make up the UK, right?
Yes.
England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. But it's still not quite the same because there's no devolved English parliament, for example.
No.
If you live in England, your national representation, you go from your council to parliament. There is no, state government, so to speak. Whereas here in Virginia, we have you. I elect you. Spoiler alert, I did actually vote for you.
Oh, good. I'm sorry.
We have you in Richmond. And then we have our congressman and our senator in D.C. as well. So, this creates a lot of nationalization of stuff, but the way that things work as well in the UK is that regional parties, or parties that have a regional base of support, it's easier for them to get into parliament than parties that have a broad base of support. So Reform's campaign was trying to appeal to the entire country. Now, obviously, there's parts of the country that are more receptive to that than others, particularly places that were more pro-Brexit, for example.
Yes.
But as a whole, Reform was trying to be a party for the traditional British citizen, right? But you look at a party like the Liberal Democrats, for example. They are the party of rich Southerners in Southern England.
Yeah.
and when you look at where they won their seats, I mean, you can look at the map and see that Southern England, anything south of basically like Birmingham, they did much, much better in, particularly in Southwest England. They've always done well there because Southwest England tends to be richer, but not necessarily leftist.
Yeah.
And so the Liberal Democrats are the party of people that don't want to vote for the Tories, but they're not interested in voting for Labour, but they also want to pride themselves on being, again, enlightened centrists.
Yeah.
And it's the Mitt Romney type Republican, so to speak.
So what is the main takeaway from the UK election? The main takeaway is Labour won a historic victory with respect to their overall seats in Parliament, but it is paper thin.
Yes.
They do not have a great deal of popular support throughout the country. Reform is on the ascendancy right now. The Tories are dropping big time. You're going to have to see one of two things. Either the Tories start backing Reform, which I really don't see as the most probable thing, or what you end up seeing as in the future, the only way the Tories can win is by working with Reform. And now you actually have a right-wing poll on the Tories as opposed to just a left-wing poll on the Tories. And you end up getting a Tory coalition government that actually governs like conservatives, because if they don't, Reform will eat their lunch. And the reason why this is so important for Americans, American conservatives, like genuine American conservatives, is because this demonstrates that sometimes it is worth it to lose the election in order to send a message. Now, I don't mean that for the 2024 presidential election. We need to win that one, right? But sometimes it is worth it to say, I am not going to support a Republican candidate that refuses to actually vote or govern like a Republican. I'm not going to do it anymore. Because it's the only way that they will get the message that that is not the direction that you want the party to go. And we saw this to some degree with McCain. We saw this to some degree with Mitt Romney, where Republicans kind of showed up and said, we're done. We're done with the milquetoast centrist Republicans. You promised us that if we got elected and we governed more like center leftists or centrists, well, then all these Democrats would realize, oh, look, we're such nice people, and they'll vote for us instead. That's not what happened. They took whatever you would give them in compromise while you were in power and then immediately called you a horrible, racist, bigoted, sexist, homophobe, took power, and then railroaded it as far as they possibly could to the left, to where by the time you finally get into power, you spend all of your time trying to undo some of the things that you're doing, and you end up with more and more Republicans that refuse to undo it, that like the new normal. And so sometimes you have to punish the people within your own party in order to get what you want. Here's the other thing. Now, here's the kind of flip side of this. Labor is inheriting a train wreck, and they're going to make it worse. And the benefit of that will be Labor will actually get the blame for leftist policies, because turns out, here's the news flash for conservatives. Leftist policies don't work even when conservatives implement them. You have some conservatives that think, well, when we manage the train wreck, it's going to be so much better than when the left manages the train wreck. And every once in a while, the voters got to remind them, we didn't elect you to manage a train wreck. We elected you to not have a train wreck. And that's what we would like. We would like to not have a train wreck. And so I think that Labor is going to double down on their policies. And they're going to create this. They're going to make the situation even worse. Labor will finally get the blame for the leftist policies that have been implemented. And hopefully you're going to see the more conservative members of the Tories and Reform actually provide a genuine alternative to Labor, which will actually address the problems that a lot of people are experiencing.
I want to go into that briefly, because there's a lot of ideological diversity within the Tories, which is part of the problem, right? I do think that Labor is going to be focused on this.
Christian diversities are straight.
Well, unfortunately, it was not their strength at all. They lost over 200 seats because of that. No, ideological diversity results in disintegration of political parties. I do think that Labor is going to be focused on this, which is the map of the results with their 400 plus seats. And they're going to be a lot less focused on this, which is the fact that Keir Starmer actually got fewer votes than Jeremy Corbyn did twice in 2017 and 2019. And Jeremy Corbyn is a straight up
Marxist.
Yeah, straight up Marxist. And he got obliterated in 2019, if you recall. And yet he still got more votes than Keir Starmer did. So that really tells you that a lot of people stayed at home because they were apathetic. Yeah. That also tells you a lot of people voted for reform or voted for another third party because they were apathetic with their options. But you know, what's interesting is you brought this up earlier, like the reason that Labor won is that when you plot out their results, like they surged specifically in the places that they needed to flip. When you look at, like, when you plot out the map, it's quadrilateral in terms of where they improved votes versus where they declined, which is why they have this huge majority with such a tiny minority. And not only that, but they actually massively underperformed the polling. The polling showed they were going to get over 40% of the votes, and they didn't even get 34%, which again is the smallest of any government. There's another clip here that I want to play that explains a bit of the problem of how this was really a Tory catastrophe. It's only 40 seconds, but listen to this.
Actually, but for the rise of the Labour Party in Scotland, which has been truly spectacular, we will be reporting that basically Labour's vote has not changed from what it was in 2019. In Wales, it's actually down, and England, it is barely changed. One has to say, this does look like an election that the Conservatives have lost, and have lost primarily because of the votes they have lost to reform, which has cost the party seat after seat after seat. Around 2/3 of the seats that the Conservatives have lost are seats where if reform voters had voted Conservative, they would still have hung on to. Actually,
so I mean that right there explains.
Well, and understand the Scottish National Party, which had risen in prominence, was a very left-wing political party. So to go from SNP to Labour is not really a big deal. But it's important to point out that again, that's what actually explains the rise in Labour's voting totals.
But if you look at the voting totals between the Conservatives and the Reform Party, if they had been united, they would have.
If they had been united, it would have been a hung parliament with Conservatives being the closest to a majority, or the Conservative Reform unity ticket being the closest to. People have plotted out the results. Reform plus Conservatives would have gotten almost 300 seats. So that they would have probably had to have like a 2010 style coalition with like the Lib Dems or something like that in order to have a majority, but they would have been in striking distance of a majority. Whereas now, I mean, they're not even close, right? Labor has so many seats, they could also form the official opposition in addition to being the government.
Yeah,
that's how many. But again, hundreds of those seats they won literally by the skin of their teeth.
Here's the other thing I think you're going to realize about, again, left-wing parties, right? The left-wing coalitions are nowhere near as ideologically aligned as you would think. You have a lot of the parties in there that will vote with the left in order to get their position, but ideologically there's some major problems there. And when they actually have to govern, this is always what we see with left-wing governments, right? When they actually have to govern, that's where the problems really come into play. And I think you're going to see this in the UK. But the UK is not the best example of the Uni-Party coming through. It just isn't. I think there's elements of that. You can certainly point to it. You can certainly see how the press, especially over there with the BBC, which is, state-sponsored, you listen to them actually looking at the exit polls. There's this one scene I saw in a video where it was talking about the polls closed and they could officially publish what the exit polls were. And you're listening to this reporter who's supposed to be an objective reporter. And honestly, I think she was about ready to light up a cigarette. Like she was like, oh my gosh. Oh, wow. I was like, whoa, lady, calm down. But she saw the Labor results and it's like they could not contain their excitement.
They were rooting for it.
They could not contain their excitement. And so that's where you see all of that. But I want to move on to the second portion now because This is a far better manifestation of what we mean by the Uni-Party, and that's what happened in the French elections. So in the French elections, keep in mind, we're going to do a brief explanation of what happened, right? EU Parliament has their elections. Right-wing candidates do overwhelmingly well, to include the National Rally in France, which is their right-wing party, right? You have all these various coalitions that they'll claim are center-right. Here's what you need to understand. Whenever the press says center-right, that's pretty much anybody that doesn't have a picture of Karl Marx on their on their wall, right? Center-right is in France bears little to no resemblance to what we would consider to be an actual right-wing political party like in the United States. They make Republicans look super right-wing. But National Rally was that was like the right-wing alternative to what's going on in France right now, especially with issues of mass migration and crime. And let me just say right off the front, National Rally has had issues, especially in the past. They have done a lot of work to try to clean up some of their image, because the original founder of National Rally, Marie Le Pen's father, straight up frigging fascist. Dude, that dude was he's a bad guy. She kicked him out of the party. So
she did kick him out.
So they have done a lot of work to try to say, look, we are not that, we are this. But there's some issues here that we want to address. You can read their party platform. But what happened is EU Parliament really shook Macron. And so he dissolved Parliament, called for snap elections. And a lot of people were wondering, why would you do this, right? Why would you do this? Well, we found out. In the first round of elections, National Rally performed incredibly well.
Yeah, here's the results in the first round, right?
Incredibly
National
well.
Rally got 33%. What's interesting is that their alliance, by the way, this is not an official name, Union of the Far Right. That's a government designation.
Yeah.
I love how.
So imagine Joe Biden renaming the Republican Party to
the extremist
the
right-wing party.
And everyone just being okay with it.
Yeah, the extremist MAGA Republicans, right? Like it's there's the Republicans and there's extremist MAGA Republicans, and that's what we're going to use as their official designation.
But in the first round, right? National Rally got 33%. The New Popular Front, take a guess what they are.
Yeah.
The New Popular Front. Oh man, what a great name to describe basically the Communist Alliance, which is effectively what it is. They got 28%. Ensemble got 21%, which is that's Macron's coalition effectively, which again, they like to, pride themselves on being enlightened centrists. Well, and then you had the Republicans, which are the center right. They're kind of like the party of like Sarkozy. They used to be the main conservative opposition until people realized that they weren't getting the job done, and so they started shifting to National Rally. They got 6%, so they got clobbered, obviously. And then you have just a bunch of super minor, groups and coalitions that effectively didn't really get anything. And so it looked like in the first round that like, oh, National Rally is going to is going to sweep this thing. Like they're going to end up winning, because once the second round comes along, like, surely the vote splitting and stuff like that, at least a few of the ensemble members are going to not vote for the little communists.
Yeah.
Right. They pride themselves on being enlightened centrists. Right.
Yeah.
And obviously the Republicans, they even self-identify as being on the right. Of course, they're going to vote for National Rally.
Yep.
And then we saw the second round results. And even though National Rally got almost 40% of the popular vote, they got third place of all three of the major coalitions in terms of seat allocation when the actual results came in. When it was all said and done, the popular front got 180 seats, Ensemble got 159, and National Rally got 142, despite the fact that they had the most number of votes, and Ensemble got the second number of seats despite getting the third number of votes, and Popular Front got the most number of seats despite massively losing. They got over 1 million less votes than National Rally, and yet they're the government now.
Yes.
Now nobody has a majority, so it's actually officially a hung parliament.
Yeah.
But like, the communists are out there like demanding that Macron like appoint one of them as prime minister, and that they basically form like a so to speak a coalition government to actually run the show. And I mean, they're putting out radical proposals right now. I mean,
and this is the part that needs to be understood. As bad as a lot of these problems were in the UK, in many cases they were significantly worse in France, because immigration to France has gone up significantly with, it can quote refugees and asylum seekers.
They're a part of the EU as well.
They're a part of the EU, and so there's different restrictions, both economic and with respect to immigration, that they have to abide by as members of the EU. And so the issue is that you have had some pretty extreme cases with both sizable terrorist attacks and then also crime in general. When you start to look at the prison population in places like France, Germany is actually even more pronounced, where like in Germany, over half their prison population are people that are not Germans, right? They're not natural born Germans. They're migrants. And so the left has gone overtime in trying to suggest, well, there's no correlation. But the results kind of speak for themselves. And again, I say this as someone that I don't fundamentally have a problem with migration. I've just always believed that if you're going to come to like the United States, it's because you want to be an American, not because you want to subvert the United States or subvert the culture or overthrow it and replace it with your own.
Or collect benefits.
Yeah, or just collect benefits, right? Like, I've never thought that was an unreasonable position to take, because I would never presume that I could move to Saudi Arabia and demand that they conduct themselves in the way that I think would be more in tune and more in line with my culture and values. Right?
And the U.S. is always...
It would never occur to me to do that, and yet it has occurred to a lot of the people immigrating to Europe and immigrating to the United States that, well, of course you have to make accommodation. And in fact, we have political parties dedicated to telling the citizens of their own country, you're the problem because it's not that they have to assimilate to our culture. In fact, our country doesn't even have a culture. You've seen, Macron even said something very, very close to, well, there's no French culture. Right. So,
which is incredible
right.
that a French political leader would say that.
Everything in their power to erase whatever culture's there.
A French political leader saying something like that would have been utterly unthinkable a century ago.
Oh my gosh. Well, but here's the deal. So the left wing, that now that they're going to have a left wing coalition government, because you're right, there wasn't one party. If we were picking, if the party that was running the French parliament was the one that got the most votes, it would be National Rally. Okay. Again, for a variety of reasons, that's not what's going to happen. You're going to have a coalition between,
and it might not even be an official coalition.
New Popular Front, et cetera. And basically, you're going to have a left-wing coalition that ends up running the government. And that left-wing coalition is already promising to double down on all the policies which have made National Rally a major contender within French politics. They're going to double down on mass migration. They're going to double down on tax increases. They're going to double down on more government control of the economy. Like, this is the stuff they're cracking down on.
They also want to double down on everything that we would call wokeism.
Yes.
I mean, they're not just actual. I mean, they are literally actual Marxists.
Yeah.
To prove the point. And Nick, I thought it was funny that you actually retweeted this and quote tweeted this I was watching the results come in because I'm a nerd and I like to spend my free time watching foreign elections. But I was watching these results come in and I saw, the projections of the results, right? And I ended up, posting this tweet, and I was like, I hope Europe is ready to ride the tiger because that's about the only option left. Yeah. The narrative that Europe is veering towards the right has been shattered. Right-wing populism simply cannot get the job done. And we might actually talk a little bit about that in the rest of this episode. But I laid out what I think is kind of the overall problem. And it was a few points. This was just me jotting down some notes as the results were coming in. They hadn't even been finalized yet. But a few of the points were that the left is too entrenched in many of these countries. You have a growing sectarian divide, which is making it easier for the left to win elections. Europe is even more, in some ways, dominated by that Leviathan managerial class that we've talked about, the bureaucracy, the bloat that we've talked at length about in the U.S. It's even worse in Europe in some respects, which, again, makes it easier for the left to win elections. And ultimately, and this is your big point, when the chips are down, so many people that identify as liberals or identify as centrists, even identify as center-right.
Yep.
Some people that even identify as libertarians, because there's a broad array of that as well. There's left libertarians, for example. A lot of those people will align themselves with literal communists, with self-avowed Marxists. And in some cases, not even just cultural Marxists, sometimes actual economic Marxists, if it means stopping the people that they view as far right, which gets back into the whole, you have two factions. You have the Uni-Party and you have the, quote, far right, even if they're not actually far right, even if they're just sensible on the right. And then And so I brought up that this is exactly what happened in France because Macron's liberal coalition essentially allied with the left-wing New Popular Front to defeat the right-wing National Rally. And then my final point was, and this is just my own personal point, I think some people have brought this up as well, but I don't think enough people have, is that from my standpoint, because the right is so steeped in populism, and I understand why, but because the right is so steeped in populism, I think that it currently lacks what could be called a counter elite that I think is actually necessary in order to defeat the kind of liberal managed decline that's,
I think it's
the de facto political order.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. It's something I want to get into when we talk about kind of our third segment here on how this affects U.S. politics. But I think the main takeaway that people need to understand from French elections is all of these parties kind of stood by to see what happened in the first round. And when it became evident that National Rally was going to crush it at the polls, here's how far these parties went. Any candidate that they thought like was going to be in second place. So let's say you're a center-right party and you're competing in an area where it's the three main contenders are you, the left-wing candidate, and National Rally. The center-right candidates would go so far as to completely drop out of the race and endorse the far left candidate in order to beat National Rally.
Here's an example.
So this would be, again, we've seen this in the United States too, right? Like what is the Lincoln Group or whatever, where your son Bill Kristol is a perfect example of this, where Bill Kristol is now openly supporting Democrat candidates that if you know anything about Bill Kristol, you would have thought there's no way he would support. Nope. If it means beating Trump, he'll support a far left wing candidate.
And if you don't believe this, here's literally an election result. By the way, to illustrate how biased many of these reporting outlets are, they use the color brown to designate National Rally. That is not a color that they themselves use. They use the French colors because they identify as French nationalists. They use red, white, and blue.
Yeah.
They use the tricolor. No, the media wants to use brown, which if you're a student of history, you know the last time a major party used the color brown, it was the NSDAP in Germany.
Yeah.
They're really, really reaching for
really
straws
trying to make
here.
them fascist. Yeah.
Here's a result from the first round in one of the constituencies in the French Parliament. So you had multiple candidates running, right? In this case, in this parliamentary constituency, you had 6 candidates running. It was really effectively a three-way race, though. You had National Rally that came in first place in the first round with 40%. You had the literal in the name, even though I can't read French perfectly, I can tell you this is the Communist Party of France. They got 29%, almost 30%. And then you had Macron's party. They got 20%. So the way that it works is that the top 2 vote getters go into the second round. You would think, oh, well, with all of these other, this is a center right, this is a left wing, this is a right wing, this is the moderates. You would think that with the National Rally getting 40% and the literal Communist Party candidate getting 30%, well, surely enough people are going to vote for National Rally, even if not a majority of the other candidates who drop out in the second round. Surely enough of them are going to vote for National Rally to defeat the Communist Party. Well, here's the result of the second round. The National Rally lost by less than 500 votes.
Yeah, less than 1%. Because so many of the other center-right.
It's a simple mathematical calculation. This is proof right here of what I said, that the story of across most of France today, self-avowed liberals literally voting for the Communist Party to defeat National Rally. And basically what I said was, when the chips are down, most liberals will support self-avowed Marxists in order to stop the right.
Well, and part of this is because I think there's a lot of centrists, or people that like to identify as centrists, that honestly believe that history has moved to a certain point where, of course, we could never X, Y, and Z. When it comes to the left, they never associate atrocity to the left. They're more than willing to associate atrocities and totalitarianism and authoritarianism to the right because they've been taught to believe that Italian fascists, Spanish fascists, and then German Nazis and fascists, well, those were all right-wing, right? And look at all the horrible things that they did, which is true that they did some horrible things. The problem is when you look at their policies, it doesn't comfortably line up with what you would consider to be right-wing ideology. You could certainly point to certain things like maybe nationalism as something that's more associated with the right. But a lot of their economic policies, a lot of their social economic policies, far more in common with the left than you would find with like the Republican Party in the United States. But it doesn't matter. Ever since World War II, everybody's mindset, especially centrists, are rooted in this idea that the far right poses the problem of atrocity and gas chambers and the Holocaust, and the far left poses the problem of higher taxes. No. All right. Yes, the Nazis, the Italian fascists. I'll even, for the purpose of this discussion right now, even though we're going to do a whole episode talking about why fascism is nowhere near as right-wing as you think it is, right? Let's concede the point for the purpose of argument that fascism was predominantly right-wing. And so therefore you should be very, very concerned about that version of right-wing. Okay, great. Concede. I'll just say right now, absolutely. Any political ideology that would push people toward authoritarianism, government control, mass murder toward people based off of their ethnicity or their sex or whatever, you should absolutely do whatever you can to defeat that component of political ideology. But can we please do an honest look of what left-wing ideology, specific communist ideology, has done? Because I got news for you. If you're looking at just body count, nobody can touch the communists when it comes to totalitarianism, authoritarianism, and mass murder in the name of a political ideology. Nobody comes close. You can add up all the deaths, all the deaths from religious wars throughout the world, and then try to compare it with what communists managed to do primarily to their own people within a 100-year time span, and it doesn't even come close to the communists. And yet, there is no concern that when communists say we're going to do X, Y, and Z, they don't really mean that.
We don't even call them far left. They're just left wing.
Just left wing. Yeah,
they're within the Overton window of acceptable political opinions. But if you want to defend your country's culture, traditions, history, language, if you identify as a nationalist in any way, even if you hold and National Rally holds a diverse array of opinions on economics.
Yes.
There's supporters of National Rally that are protectionists. There's supporters of National Rally that don't want to raise the retirement age, or they want to keep a lot of the social welfare system in place. There's also supporters within the National Rally. Jordan Bardella is actually an example of this. He's the younger kind of like co-leader alongside Marine Le Pen, who wants lower taxes and less spending and supports more free markets. There's disputes within their own party on some of the economic issues. But the thing that unites them is that they all identify as French patriots, as French nationalists. Nope, that's dangerous. It's dangerous for you to want to have a country.
Yeah.
It's dangerous for you to want to have borders. It's not dangerous for you to want to seize the means of production.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's what we're going to see happen is they're going to double down on all of these left-wing economic policies, which never bring about economic prosperity. They always drive people away and drive people into poverty. But some of the migration issues, they know why they won. Let's put it partially. They know in part why they won. And so they're going to double down on the things that they think give them political power. And the question that the right is going to have to respond to is there is a radical component to the right. And the radical component of the right is not one that is so focused on the economic side of it, right? And the concepts of individual liberty and property rights, right? There is an element of right-wing populism. An element, it's not the whole thing, but there's an element of right-wing populism that really couldn't care less about the tax rates or, government spending. What they care about is national identity, right? And essentially having a sense of pride in one's culture. And while there is nothing wrong in and of itself of having a sense of national identity and pride in one's culture, if it is completely divorced from any sort of coherent, like actual political ideology rooted in the kind of the universal value of human life, right? The universal value of individual liberty, private property rights, self-determination. Like if that all goes out the window to just, nope, our national pride, well then, yeah, that's dangerous. That's dangerous because then what happens is whatever people happen to be in charge ultimately get to end up to decide what constitutes national pride. And that's problematic. And that has traditionally not been a component of American patriotism or American nationalism.
That does get to a difference between what we call the European right and the American right. And we've talked before, actually, in our episode about the EU elections where we said World War II broke Europe. Yeah. Everything's now viewed through the lens of the mid-20th century. And whereas from an American point of view, we look at World War II as we won.
Yeah.
The United States won, right? We defeated Nazism, we defeated fascism in Italy, we defeated Japan. The United States fought a two-front war in both the Atlantic and the Pacific, and we won on both fronts. In Europe, though, certainly in Eastern Europe, the communists won. It wasn't the United States that won. It wasn't classical liberalism. It wasn't the American tradition that won. On the European continent, it was Marxism that won.
Yeah.
And that changed the way that politics is viewed. And what's interesting, it actually changed the way that politics is viewed in Western Europe more so than in Eastern Europe, because in Eastern Europe, they replaced one form of tyrannical subjugation under Hitler for a brief amount of time, for about 4 years, like in Poland, with 40 years of tyrannical subjugation under Marxism, under the Soviet Union, because they were behind the Iron Curtain. But what's interesting is that Eastern Europe lived through that experience. And so you see countries like Hungary and Poland that are very much anti-Marxist, anti-communist, and in Poland's case, very anti-Nazi, very anti-fascist as well, for obvious reasons. But in Western Europe, which didn't have to live with the consequences of living on the wrong side of the Iron Curtain, they get to just play with the theory. And because Marxism defeats fascism on the European continent in the Eastern Front, but Western Europe doesn't have to deal with the consequences of living under really either regime. Obviously, briefly, they did have to live under Nazi occupation for 4 years, but they didn't have to deal with 40 years of Marxism subjecting themselves. They get to just look at the theory of the victors on the Eastern Front and be like, oh, we want that. And we get to retool it. We get to talk about Marxism and feminism, or Marxism and gender, and this is where you get cultural Marxism emerging from, right? And we've now seen the results of this, a generation after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and we've talked about this before. In some ways, the Marxists won the Cold War as well.
Well, I think you saw college professors in the United States say, well, thank God the Soviet Union fell, not because they were less Marxist, but because now they didn't feel like Marxism was going to be polluted by some of the atrocities that happened within the Soviet Union. So it's not as if they learned their lesson. They just said, well, that was just a bad representation of it. We'll do it better. But here's what you also see, and this is why I think this is relevant to what we see going on in the United States. When the Marxists controlled, Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union, et cetera, when they controlled that, it's not as if they allowed for dissenting opinions within their school system, within the university system, within their political system, within their corporate structures, or such as they were, right? Government-owned institutions or whatever. They didn't allow for that. Saying stuff like that made you a subversive. It meant you were an enemy of the people, which really meant an enemy of the state. Okay, what you're seeing in France right now is a coalition of all of the left-wing government, and this, I'm going to clarify this, but the left-wing party is essentially saying, we're going to team up to make sure that no matter what happens, that person doesn't win. And you see the centrists going along with them. Now, I know why the left is doing it, right? The left is doing it because they view it as their ideological enemies. Now, the center, especially the center-right parties, you would look at it and be like, you have some differences of opinion, but these are not your ideological opponents. That would be the assumption. The problem is, and I think this is true of a lot of centrists now, is because you have grown up in an educational environment, because you have grown up in an arts and entertainment environment that has been overwhelmingly dominated by left-wing ideology, sometimes subtle, sometimes overt, you don't see the threat from the extreme left. You only see the threat from the extreme right. And now the media, which is also predominantly dominated by left-wing ideology, classifies anything to the left of themselves as extreme right. The only way you get classified as one of the good guys on the right is if you are constantly capitulating, or in this case, collaborating with the left. That's it.
If you punch right and pander left, you're considered a good guy, even if you identify as being on the right.
Yes.
But the second that you don't share the same enemy as them, then you're far right. Anybody to the right of Macron is far right.
Yeah. And keep in mind, the moment they actually have this coalition government, they start to actually determine positions and cabinet level positions and whatnot, the more control they get over the state apparatus, the more they will use that state control to exclude anybody with a differing opinion. They will first try to do it through the HR and preventing you from being there. If you're already there, they will either try to do it through legal means, which is suing you all the time, or making sure you don't get grants or whatever it is, or they will try to do it in such a way to where they make your life so miserable that you just choose to go, because why would I put up with this crap? Why would I stay someplace where I'm not wanted? right? And then the more of you that leave, the more they will close the door behind to make sure that nobody like you ever gets to go there again. Because why? You're a threat to the institution. You're a threat to democracy. You're a threat to the people. You're a threat to the state, right? So let me ask you something. Where does that also sound familiar right now? It certainly sounds familiar within Western academia. It certainly sounds more and more familiar within leftist ideological discussions about if you believe this, then you're a threat to democracy. And I'm not talking about we're going to overthrow the United States government. I'm talking about I don't agree with your tax policy, or I don't agree with the way that you changed election laws in such a way as to benefit yourself at the expense of others. I don't like how easy you made it to actually commit fraud, even if fraud is not, the guaranteed result every time. No, now you're a threat to democracy.
They even say that if you're one of the people who say we're not a democracy, we're a constitutional republic. If you even say that, well, now you're denying we're a democracy, and see, that's a threat to democracy.
Well, you're seeing news reporters saying that if you believe in God-given rights or natural rights, well, that's a form of Christian nationalism. It's like, then I guess pretty much all the founders were Christian nationalists, because right there in the Declaration of Independence, right, we hold these truths to be self-evident, right, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable right off the bat. That's like the founding ideological, document of the United States, of what would eventually become the United States. And now that's being redefined as a form of Christian nationalism if you don't believe that your rights are derived from a political entity. So again, this goes back to Gramsci, it goes back to everything else. The object is to control the environment in which you live, eat, breathe, everything.
Yes.
So that you can create a competing culture to go against what used to be the dominant culture within the United States, that was, you can worship how you want to worship. You can believe what you want to believe. You can vote how you want to vote. But there's certain core fundamental aspects of American culture that make it unique and special. And the current left does not share that in the United States. And what you're about to see, and this is the part I want to discuss, because after the debate, right, the first round fired over in the EU, right, was the EU parliamentary elections, and the result in France was, okay, quick, left, we've got to get our game together, and they along with the center right, they came together and said, okay, let's get our crap together because we're going to lose otherwise. And what do? They throw out old alliances. They throw out any pretense of having some sort of like ideological, consistency, and immediately side with the most extreme leftist candidates they possibly can to prevent national rally, to prevent right-wing populism. Okay? In the U.S., the first round, really fired was the debate, I think. Now, you could point to a lot of other conditions that were created, but when you talk about catalysts,
the analogy of the first round, yes.
Yeah, what was the part where the left understood, oh crap, we have a problem, and now we've got to do something about that problem right away?
This explains why they're going after Joe Biden. It's not, a lot of people have this idea, and people that I actually support, like Chip Roy's a good example of this. Chip Roy wants to invoke the 25th Amendment. That'd be a mistake.
Dumb move.
It'd be a mistake because the reason that the left is concerned about Joe Biden right now is not because they're actually concerned about who's running the country or the responsibility of the office of the president. No, it's pure cold, hard, calculated, realpolitik, basically. It's, we might not be able to win with this guy. We need to get somebody else in. There's this tweet that I want to show that I think really encapsulates a bit of the problem. And he's quoting somebody talking about what happened in France, but he's bringing up the point of the U.S. And he was like, in France, just as in America, there's one genuine right, which is what we were just talking about. And all the other parties and pretend factions at the end of the day are not enemies, but allies who will work to oppose it. Eventually, this leads to a social revolution as the right continually gains adherents and the left, which only exacerbates social problems, panics and engages in ever more totalitarian and unethical tactics to exclude the right from any power or influence. We are seeing this right now in the electoral gamemanship before the last round of voting in France, where every other party regardless of ideology, conspired against the right. And we are seeing it in America with the media's desperate covering for Biden for years and then turning immediately on him when it became clear he could no longer serve as their useful figurehead. Understand what time it is and do not despair. The road is there. The road there is rocky, but victory is inevitable. And the point that he's trying to get across is similar to what you were saying, that they're turning on Joe Biden right now, not because they're actually concerned about our democracy.
Yeah.
They only concern about our democracy when they win. Otherwise,
Yeah.
they don't actually give a damn about democracy.
Yeah.
They're turning on Joe Biden because they've made the calculus that, oh, he lost the first round, right? He's Macron's party. He lost
Yeah.
the first round. We now need to vote for the communists because
Yeah.
they made it to the second round, and that's the only way that we can defeat, the far right, opposition that's our real true enemy.
Yeah.
They're trying to find somebody, and once they get them, if they do, we don't know yet if they're going to actually be able to successfully eject Biden. But if they do, if they put anybody in there, Newsom, Harris, doesn't matter who it is, right? Oh, they will immediately lockstep get behind that person. They will, astroturf everything in order to defend them at every single turn. They will try to rig the game as much as possible in terms of, remember how they used to provide questions in the debates to certain candidates to benefit them. They will lambast us as being enemies of democracy and threats and far right.
You will see a never-ending stream coming out of whoever the Democrats pick if they jettison Biden, and I think they're going to at this point. And by the way, we've got to give Tina credit here because Tina, we did I think it was in January or March.
I said they wouldn't keep Biden.
We did an episode, and Chris and I both said no, they're going to have to keep Biden, which still could happen.
I'm not wrong yet.
It still could happen, but let's just say that the probability of them keeping Biden is the lowest it has been since we had that conversation. And you had said right up front, guys, there's no way they're keeping him.
Yeah, I said that, but now I've changed my mind a little bit because I thought for sure they would swap him out for Newsom and that they would do it with enough time to be able to swap for Newsom. Well, now I think one of the reasons why, Chip Roy and some various other people on the right do want to implement the 25th Amendment is because that would put Harris in as president. And then she would get basically first right of refusal to become the heir apparent nominee.
Yeah.
And the reason why I think they want that on the right, I think aside from Biden, I think that Harris is going to be the easiest one to beat of any of the other possibilities. Even though Newsom should be totally easy to beat because of his record, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. He's a bright, shiny object, and people love bright, shiny objects. And
he's a skilled debater. It's like he's not a
he's
bad
well
public
spoken.
speaker.
He's young. He's good looking, and they're how it is.
And he doesn't have a
most of
record
these voters
in
are
the
women,
Oval
and
Office.
women are crap voters. And I'm sorry, I'm not, but a lot of my female, whatever you want to call them. Yeah. They vote like complete and utter morons, just like they pick their men.
It does make sense for Chip Roy to say, hey, look, it's if he is mentally incompetent, which I think it's very clear that he is right now, then the you could say the responsible thing to do is to invoke the 25th Amendment.
That way it's forced to be Harris.
Yeah.
And if it's Harris, then she has to wear the legacy of Biden.
And they've got to unseat Harris.
I want them to be stuck with Biden.
From
my
I want
standpoint,
that too.
it's
Don't
that's
get me
the
wrong.
easiest path
I
to win.
want that
She doesn't
too.
think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
The difference is if Biden, if they show up to the convention and Biden voluntarily steps down, now they get to pick. And by the way, the left will get to pick their leader the way the left likes to pick their leaders, behind closed doors with as little input from the people as possible.
Which is a literal threat to democracy.
Right? That's how they like to be. Because Biden's cognitive decline is not new to anybody that's been paying attention, right? Everybody knew, to include them.
If you were only reading the New York Times, though, or Washington Post, this might be a shock to you.
And the left preferred him to not be an intellectually rigorous person because as
that way they could be the marionette. They could just pull the strings and make it all happen.
As Barack Obama is alleged to have said, don't underestimate Joe Biden's ability to F things up, right? So they liked a Joe Biden that would just sit there and eat his ice cream and not really do much so that they could run the show, right? Because we all know they control the bureaucracy. And so they got to control, through staffers and bureaucracy, they got to control what was actually going on, right? Now, all of a sudden, they're in an issue where it's like, oh my gosh, Biden versus Trump. Trump is going to crush him. In fact, not only is Trump going to win, right? Not only is he going to win the Electoral College, not only is he almost definitely going to win the popular vote, but maybe the hope that, well, some people vote for Trump, but maybe we'll be able to take back Congress. No. You're losing, and you're losing bad, right? The House is going to increase its numbers. Trump is going to win his seat. The
Senate will flip.
Senate will flip. And now all of a sudden, you have a unified government that can actually make good on some of the things Trump wants to do. And this time around, Trump isn't going to defer to a weak, who was Speaker of the House when Trump first came? Ryan.
Yeah, it was Paul Ryan.
Paul Ryan from Wisconsin. He's not going to go like, oh, well, I'll defer to you guys in the House. No. It's going to be like, this is what we're doing, and if you don't, I'm coming after you in your reelection.
Well, I certainly hope so. That gets into the fear of what happened in the UK.
Yes.
To go back to there for a minute, because the Tories ran the show for 14 years, and they fumbled the ball, like I said earlier, repeatedly, and governed like a left-wing party. And there's Tory members who won their seats and some who unfortunately lost their seats that were the few good guys. There were genuinely a few Tories that were good on the issues.
Yeah.
The problem was that the overwhelming majority of their own caucus, their own party, were not.
Yeah.
And they kept elevating leader after leader who was not good on the issues. But a handful of them understand what the problem is and are trying to make overtures to reform in order to form, to quote Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is one of those more conservative Tories, to reunite the conservative family.
Yeah.
But in the U.S., the problem that I fear is not necessarily who wins the presidential election. It's what comes after the election, because at that point, the voters' control over what the politicians do is effectively ended for 2 years. And we've been betrayed by our own party repeatedly.
Absolutely. And that's the concern. And we want a big enough win. Like, we can't just barely win by the skin of our teeth again, because we have certain ones who perpetually wet the bed every single freaking time we have a chance to remove some crappy policy. You've got a Mitt Romney or a Susan Collins who are right there ready to rally with the Democrats and vote against the Republican agenda. And I think that if we don't get a massive majority, we're just gonna fall into that again. And then we've got all these people who have voted the right way every single time and continue to vote the right way, who get punished for these other people voting the wrong way.
Yeah, nothing's more frustrating than carrying the right legislation, talking about the right things, voting the right way, and having people slam you because you're no different than why? Well,
why aren't you doing
this? Because you haven't been able to change anything. I'm one vote in 100 in the House of Delegates. I'm one vote in 140 in the General Assembly, and I'm one vote. Really, what you need is 141 because you got to have the governor's signature on it. But the point is that if we do get Trump, House, and the Senate, I think you're going to see a very, very robust. I think you're going to see a Trump that pulls a lot of Republicans aside and said, if you're doing this because you think it's going to help you keep your seat, I promise you it won't. I promise you it won't. And I have to tell you, from sitting on the inside of politics too, you'd be shocked at how many conversations are all about keeping your seat.
Oh yeah.
And I get it to a degree, but when keeping your seat means you never accomplish anything, maybe it's time for you to go. Or maybe you're part of the problem. Or maybe what needs to happen is people need to feel the pain so they can understand why we need to actually get these policies implemented. What's going to happen in the UK is they're going to feel the pain. What's going to happen in France is they're going to feel the pain. The US still has an opportunity to win this, but we have to understand what winning needs to mean. Because if winning just means, oh, we're in charge for the next 2 years, and now we need to protect our majority, what that always means, every single time, is compromise on everything you told the people you were going to do so you don't make the Dems mad at us. Guess what, people? They're already mad at you. They don't like you. They don't want you there. All of you people in these little swing districts, they're so nice to me and I'm the one they'll vote for. There's a reason for it. It's because they don't perceive you as a threat to what they actually want.
And the second they can get you out.
The second they can get you out, I promise you, you will become the racist, bigoted, sexist, fascist that all the rest of us apparently were, right, when it's convenient for their political narrative. So the wake-up call on all of this should be, in the U.S., is one, we need to understand that just like the fix was in. The press in France are like, oh my gosh, what a surprising upset. What do you mean it's a surprising upset? You guys were all telegraphing exactly what you were going to do. The media was right there in on the fix, trying to paint, National Rally as nothing more than a bunch of rebranded Nazis, right? At the same time that it was, all these other parties are literally dropping out their candidates and then throwing all their support behind communists in order to win. No, the fix was in and you were part of the fix. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the fix is going to be in the U.S. and the media is part of the fix. And so what needs to be understood is, so now stop being surprised about what's going to happen next and outwork them. And this is the part that I want to make very, very clear to everyone listening to this. For everyone that believes that 2020 was stolen, here's what I want you to understand. 2020, the reason why Joe Biden is president has far more to do with what the left legally did than what they illegally did. And they love it when the right focuses exclusively on what they illegally did. Because what it does is all the focus goes there, and one of two things happen. Either A, people think that the only way to solve the problem is to solve it over here, and if you can't, well then what's the point? And so you depress the vote, because why should I show up if none of it matters? That is absolutely what the left wants you to be convinced of.
Right.
In reality, the real rigging of the election wasn't stuffing ballot boxes anywhere near as much as it was the media working in collusion with Democrat-controlled state governments to drastically change voter laws, legally drastically change voter laws, to create scenarios where it was easy for them to, through mail-in voting, through everything else, in order to give themselves the maximum amount of advantage with low information voters.
Ballot harvesting as well.
Ballot harvesting. And on top of that, to create a narrative within the media, within social media and everywhere else, that everything that you were hearing from the right was either Russian disinformation, some sort of collusion, some sort of, far right-wing scary talk in order to convince centrists that, well, gosh, you can't vote for this guy. Yeah, sure, you might not agree with everyone over here, but look how nice and reasonable they are. This is someone you can imagine having a cocktail with. Whereas that guy is really, really mean, right? We got to prevent that because they're fascists. And so what needs to happen now is Americans need to understand this is what's going to take place.
Yeah, and these are the laws that are on the books.
Yeah.
So you can't go and start railing against all this ballot harvesting and whining and complaining about how this is just a loophole for them to cheat. No, it's a legal mechanism. So get versed in the legal mechanism.
If you were boxing,
if they're going to ballot harvest, we should start ballot harvesting way harder than they are. I mean, this is the playing field that we're on. We need to start playing by those rules, and we need to start making them want to change the laws because we're better at it.
It's not just about the legal system, too. Remember when the Hunter Biden laptop story came out, and it was like the FBI, you had all these intel agency officials that were saying this is all Russian disinformation, and then you had platforms like Facebook and Twitter, the old regime at Twitter, that just straight up shut it down and censored the story. And so it's not just government. This is the problem, is that there's a lot of people on the right, particularly in the United States, that have this almost dogmatic ideological approach to things where it's like tyranny can only come about through government law and government force. No, there's a whole nother mechanism. This is why I really try to bring up, it's the managerial class and bureaucracies, not just in government agencies. It exists outside of that as well. The Leviathan is more than just DC departments.
If you're asking, so many people asking the question, what job do you get? The joke is, you got a job in like gender studies and queer theory. Would you like fries with that, right? Or how would you like your coffee? No, those people are now in HR departments.
Yep.
They're in HR departments setting the rules with respect to what is allowable speech within the corporate space, within your company space, and handling the recruiting. We know this because there was, during the whole trucker rally in Canada, there was an HR recruiter that she ended up getting fired with this. I don't think because they disagreed with what she said, but because she gave it away what they were doing. She goes, I'm a recruiter at a company. You truckers, we hate you, and we all talk to one another. So good luck ever getting a job, and good luck keeping the job that you already have, because we'll make sure everyone knows who you are, and we'll make sure you lose your, like, whoa, what?
Saying the quiet part out loud right there.
Yeah, and they weren't allowed to say the quiet part out loud, right? You can't say that out loud until you have complete control. And here's what I want people to understand. The next battle that's going to take place is replacing Biden. The media are not just all of a sudden learning that Biden has cognitive difficulties.
No, they've been complicit in this the entire time. And if the American people don't wise up, and if they're just going to be spoon-fed whatever the media tells them forever, then they get what they deserve.
Unfortunately, we're going to get what they deserve. And I don't want that. But what they're going to do is they're going to come out and say, like, the big thing now is the left is going to position themselves not at a position of, oh, no, we're going to lose the election. They're going to position themselves from a couple of different angles. One, we didn't realize it was this bad, or he's really declined suddenly in the last couple of weeks, or this is what's best for the country, or this is what democracy.
Or like the White House hid it from us.
Yeah, or this is what the democracy requires, right? It's never going to be, hey, we knowingly lied to you for a couple of years now, and now we're just being honest that, we get it, he's a train wreck.
Even though they did knowingly lie to us, and there's video recording of it all up one side and down the other.
But again, that's the point.
Why won't people just believe it and start, like, just don't trust the freaking media?
You know why people won't believe it is because, and this gets to your point, Nick, people won't believe it because ultimately the left won by not winning an election. The left won by hijacking institutions, creating an elite that effectively runs most of the bureaucracy. And then at that point, elections become a formality. Elections become the final stage of a process through which you execute your vision. But it's not the first stage of the process.
This is the important part. This is the important part I'm getting to, right? There's a reason why the left was never interested in doing this to this level against John McCain or Mitt Romney.
Because they
or
weren't
even
a threat.
George W. Bush. They didn't represent any sort of threat to the established bureaucratic order that they are very happily entrenched in. All right. For instance, we all know that higher ed in this country is overwhelmingly left-wing. And yet every year between state and federal governments, $1 trillion gets transferred from taxpayers into institutions which have become overwhelmingly ideologically left-wing, because that's what the left does. They get into power, they help their friends, they punish their enemies. Right. So here's what we need to understand. Right. First and foremost, they have to get rid of Biden, and they know it. So there's going to be all kinds of different reasons why that needs to take place. Ideally for them, Biden chooses to step down. That's the ideal situation for them. The next one is something happens to Biden. I'm not saying they murder him. I'm just saying that something happens to Biden, whether he gets removed because the 25th Amendment, or he falls down the stairs one too many times.
And I'm assuming the next step is convention fight.
Yes. So they need something, but they also know they can't go into the convention with a huge bloody fight on their hands, which is going to cause a lot of division within their own party. So they're going to have to get rid of Biden one way or another. And then they have to go into the convention fairly unified against or behind a particular candidate. And then what's going to happen, and anybody that challenges that status quo is going to get instantly demonized. Get ready for them to get prosecuted with something. Get ready for, pictures to show up that somebody's been holding on to forever. Get ready for their name to show up on a travel log to Epstein Island. Any leftist, anybody on the left, which challenges whoever the, coronated party is coming out of that convention, will get drugged through the mud like you would not believe by the media. They will get just destroyed. Next, it will be full on. You think you have heard the worst in accusations against Donald Trump or individual Republican candidate. No, it will be a steady drumbeat of anything and everything. They will throw any accusation at the wall they possibly can, because one of the things that they've also learned is they've been going after Trump with lawfare, with character assassination. And can we be honest? In a lot of cases, Trump makes it kind of easy. All right. One piece of advice for Donald Trump, who I plan to vote for, campaign for, and donate for, just sleep with your wife, right? Nobody else, just your wife. I'd really appreciate that. Thank you. All right. They're going to go after him with everything you can, because here's what they've also recognized. So many people on the right have now come to the conclusion, right, myself included, that the quote unquote moderate voices within my own party don't actually agree with me on the things that matter, and have not properly understood what this fight is about. For them, what the fight is about is them keeping their position, keeping their status, keeping their privileged place within the order as it currently. They really don't have any desire to change things that desperately need to be changed, that have led to a lot of the problems, right? I understand that person is now a major part of the problem. right? The French elections have illustrated just how far that they will actually go in order to prevent any sort of upset of the status quo for which they have their power and prestige. Okay? Trump gets that. Trump gets that. And so for all the flaws, for all the moral issues that I have with Trump, for even some of the policy issues that I have with Trump, I will tell you right now, some of the things that Trump is like forcing on the Republican Party platform, I find reprehensible. I'm furious about it. I get why he's doing it. I get why he thinks electorally it'll be more satisfactory for him in this particular race. I have a huge problem with it. I also understand that the bigger fight right now is with an entire political ideology in this country that has become so overwhelmingly dominant in the culturally shaping institutions and a lot of the political shaping institutions of this country that it has to be opposed, that it has to be fought, and it has to be fought effectively. And so I get it. I get it. I get the strategic fight, and I'm here for it. That doesn't mean I'm willing to go along with anything that the right now all of a sudden decides is appropriate. I have a fundamental level. I have lines that nobody gets to cross. You don't get to cross it from the left, and you don't get to cross it from the right.
The analogy is, to use the French analogy, when I brought up how there's a diversity of opinions within National Rally, I can have debates within National Rally on what the top marginal tax rate should be or what trade policy should look like. But if we share that shared vision, and me, if I was hypothetically French, right? If we shared that vision on what French history and culture and traditions mean, and we have that as a starting point, I can have those debates. There's other debates about the economic stuff. And this gets into the ultimate problem. I know that you're getting to the conclusion here, but like the ultimate problem is you can't have those debates on some of these other marginal things that I think are still important, because I believe in things like the Austrian school. I'm an ardent free market supporter, but you can't have those debates with somebody where you share no starting philosophy, no foundation, no shared. You don't even share a country with these people. You share an economic zone with these people.
Yeah.
When there's no starting point, you can't have these broader discussions on other policy points.
When there's absolutely no shared sense of cultural identity, you don't have a country anymore. You have the Balkans.
Yes.
Right? You have this idea where we're all just warring factions fighting over an archaic political institutions in order to impose our wills on others. I have to have some sort of shared identity, which means some sort of shared appreciation for fundamental principles, which we believe are inextricably linked to the United States. We have to have some sort of shared appreciation for our past. We have to have some sort of like shared understanding which of the present based off of logic and appreciation for objective truth, morality, and reality. And we have to have some sort of shared vision about where we want to go. If we don't have those things, all of the other issues are superfluous, because ultimately we want to go in completely opposite directions, and that's how countries tear each other apart. And right now the bigger fight is I'm aligning with those people that have those shared core values. Now, I will tell you this, for me, the belief in, again, the Declaration of Independence is a great way to summarize this, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that they're entitled by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Insofar as we can agree on certain a basic fundamental principle like that, we can work out the trade policy. And we may disagree, but as long as logic and empiricism can actually inform our decision when we've tried something and it hasn't worked and allow us to get to a better solution going forward, I can work with that. But if you don't have those shared fundamental moral beliefs, and you don't have a shared appreciation for the actual logical processes we use to distinguish between things that work and things that don't, there is no future. You want something different, and God bless you, go have it. But this country was supposed to rest on certain things. And that's what we're actually fighting for right now. So everyone, here's what I want you, here's the main takeaway. Just understand, based off of what we're seeing all over the world right now and what we're seeing in the United States, you know they're going to try to replace Biden. You know they're not going to be honest about why they're doing it. If Biden could have performed every bit as horribly, but if the poll numbers came back and he was up by 6 points, they wouldn't be trying to replace him. They wouldn't be trying to replace him because their mission right now is to defeat Trump. And whatever serves that, serves it. Whatever doesn't, doesn't. So all of the different excuses and arguments that you're going to hear, in fact, here's one of the ways that they're going to trick you. They're going to use arguments we've been using for the past 3 years to justify why now he needs to go. Then the same people that were pro-democracy are going to find the least democratic way possible to select who their potential nominee is going to be. Then they're going to punish anybody on the left that challenges that, whether it be the process of it or the individual that they choose. And then all you're going to see from now on election day, by the time they have their person to election day, the only thing that you're going to see is accusation after accusation after accusation against Trump and anybody running on the Republican ticket. They're going to do everything possible to scare you, to disgust you, to make you think, especially you centrists, especially you people that don't particularly like politics. Maybe you consider yourself more center-right, but you don't like to feel icky about your candidate. They're going to do everything they can to make you feel icky about your candidate. I hate using that word, but that's the word. They know they're not going to win on a policy discussion because they failed. They know they're not going to win by suggesting that they're the ones that have followed democratic principles because they haven't. They're going to have to try to convince you that your selection, your candidate, is unacceptable. And the way they're going to do that is through social pressure. The way they're going to do that is by making you feel alienated from your friend group, from your social circles, whatever it is. And so just don't be surprised by it. Because if you're not surprised by it, you're far less likely to be fooled by it. Because what we need right now is for people to understand that no candidate's perfect. But there's certain things that we should fight for. And one of the most important things that we need to understand about this election cycle, and hopefully one's going forward as well, because this is going to be a long fight, is that candidates can say whatever they want. You might agree with them on a whole variety of topics. If they don't understand what the nature of the actual ideological fight is right now, they're not worthy to represent you. They will let you down. They will fail you. So that's the thing that we really need to ask of anybody that wants to hold political power at this stage of the game. Once again, thank you very much for joining us. We hope we provide you a good, clear, concise, somewhat comprehensive analysis of kind of what's going on over in the UK and France and how it could be relevant to the United States. Once again, go ahead and check out our show notes page. Check out Jeremy's Razors. Use promo code Nick for that 15% discount on your entire order. And once again, thank you very much for watching, commenting. And if you get a chance, go on over to Circle, because once again, a lot of the show ideas that we get come from our Circle audience over there. It's a great place to get tied in with our community. So once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next episode.